This mother shared on TikTok how much she was struggling following her husband's terminal brain cancer diagnosis. She documented their family's heartbreaking journey through 80 videos, building thousands of followers who watched in real time as she navigated the devastating reality of losing the love of her life. Her vulnerability was raw, her pain authentic, and her dedication to her 3 young children seemed unwavering. Yet beneath this carefully crafted digital diary lay secrets so dark that just 2 days after her final post, Emily Long would commit an act so unthinkable it would shatter everything her followers thought they knew about her.
Depressed and just have really become reclusive and just wanted to be with my kids and my husband. And while that might feel good for me, I don't think that's good for me. So that being said, I'm making a change. It is starting today. I'm going to start getting dressed. I'm going to probably not put makeup on because I don't really wear makeup very often unless I'm going somewhere, but I need to become more social again. I used to be like the most social human on this planet, and the past month I have basically declined 98% of all offers, and my kids need to be with their friends. So hold me to it. Today I am adjusting my perspective, and I'm making a point to get out of my depression and do this for my family. So that being said, happy Saturday. Everyone's having a fantastic day. I'm going to have a fantastic day.
In today's hyper-connected world, social media has transformed us all into voyeurs of strangers' most intimate moments. Through carefully curated posts and seemingly spontaneous video confessions, we witness joy, heartbreak, triumph, and struggle in real time. We form parasocial relationships with people we've never met, investing emotionally in their stories as if they were our own family members. But rarely do we get such a complete and devastating look at how a family tragedy can unfold so publicly, so thoroughly documented, as what happened to the Long family of Madbury, New Hampshire in the summer of 2025. What makes this case particularly chilling is that Emily Long herself provided the roadmap to her own destruction, leaving behind a digital trail that would later serve as evidence of a mind slowly unraveling under pressures that proved too much to bear. Emily Long seemed to embody the American dream. At just 34 years old, she had climbed the corporate ladder to become director of operations for Wingits, a successful chicken wing restaurant chain that was expanding rapidly across New England. Her position came with significant responsibility, substantial salary, and the kind of professional respect that takes years to build. Her husband, Ryan, 48, had dedicated his career to helping others as a respected school psychologist, working with children who faced emotional and behavioral challenges. Together, they were raising 3 beautiful children in their suburban New Hampshire home. 8-year-old Parker, a bright boy who was already showing signs of his father's compassionate nature. 6-year-old Ryan Jr., energetic and curious about the world around him, and their youngest, a 3-year-old boy who still saw his parents as invincible protectors. From every external perspective, the Longs represented success, stability, and the kind of family life that others aspired to achieve. But even perfect-looking families can harbor devastating secrets, and Emily Long was living a double life that would have made any Hollywood thriller seem tame by comparison. While she presented herself as the devoted wife and mother, the successful career woman who had everything under control, the truth was far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The first domino in what would become an unstoppable cascade toward tragedy fell in April 2025, when Ryan received news that would fundamentally alter everything the Long family thought they knew about their future. After experiencing persistent headaches and concerning neurological symptoms, doctors delivered a diagnosis that hits families like a freight train: glioblastoma, one of the most aggressive and merciless forms of brain cancer known to medical science. The statistics were brutally clear and offered little hope for miracles. The average survival time ranges from just 12 to 18 months, with only 5% of patients living beyond 5 years. For a family with young children, for a couple who had planned decades together, this diagnosis represented the complete destruction of every dream they had carefully constructed. Emily's response to this devastating news was both deeply human and tragically revealing. Rather than retreating into private grief, she turned to TikTok, creating an account that would eventually attract thousands of followers drawn to her raw honesty about confronting terminal illness. Her bio read simply, "New Hampshire mom of 3, brain cancer wife, my digital diary. It's cheaper than therapy." That last comment about therapy being too expensive would prove to be tragically prophetic, as Emily would consistently avoid seeking the professional psychological help she desperately needed, instead relying on the artificial connection of social media to process emotions that required real trained intervention. Over the course of 4 months, Emily would post more than 80 videos documenting Ryan's diagnosis, treatment, and deteriorating condition. Her content ranged from practical discussions about medical appointments and treatment options to deeply personal confessions about her fears, frustrations, and growing sense of helplessness. In one of her earliest clips, filmed shortly after receiving the diagnosis, Emily's devastation was completely unfiltered and heartbreakingly genuine.
And while I seem right now like I'm handling it well, I'm not. And I basically cry 24/7. At the end of the day, his main focus is that we have a quality time with our kids as a family, that he can do the things that he loves for however long he's on this earth for. And look, I will do anything in my power. There is no dollar amount, there is no distance, there is nothing that will stop me from doing everything that I can to keep my husband on this earth for as long as possible.
What struck viewers immediately was Emily's raw authenticity. This wasn't the polished, inspirational content that often dominates social media discussions of illness and adversity. Instead, Emily showed herself crying, struggling, admitting to anger and resentment alongside love and determination. Her vulnerability created an immediate connection with followers who appreciated her refusal to sugarcoat the reality of watching someone you love slowly die. However, as weeks passed and Emily continued documenting their journey, some viewers began noticing subtle but troubling patterns in her communication style and emotional processing. Even when discussing Ryan's condition, symptoms, or treatment progress, Emily frequently centered the conversation on her own suffering and emotional state. While this might seem natural for someone processing trauma, mental health professionals who would later review her content noted concerning signs of what psychologists call emotional hijacking. The tendency to consistently redirect focus away from others' needs toward one's own psychological state, even in situations where the other person is facing more immediate threats. In one particularly disturbing video that would later be analyzed extensively by experts, Emily made a statement that revealed the depth of her psychological distress and her growing inability to process the reality of eventually losing Ryan.
Doing everything that I can to keep my husband on this earth for as long as possible. And like, I would literally keep my husband like in a vegetative coma just to have him be with me. Like, it's just not feasible. I have to be.
This comment, while spoken in the context of expressing how much she loved Ryan and couldn't imagine life without him, actually revealed something much darker about Emily's psychological state. Rather than focusing on Ryan's dignity, quality of life, or his own wishes about end-of-life care, Emily was expressing a selfish desire to preserve him for her own emotional needs, regardless of what that might mean for his suffering or autonomy. Mental health professionals who study family dynamics in terminal illness cases recognize this type of statement as a red flag, indicating that the caregiver may be developing unhealthy attachment patterns and losing sight of the patient's best interests. What Emily's growing audience of TikTok followers couldn't possibly know was that while she was publicly documenting her husband's illness and presenting herself as a devoted wife fighting against impossible odds, she was simultaneously managing a complex criminal enterprise that had been operating in secret for over 2 years. The stress of maintaining this double life, grieving wife and devoted mother by day, sophisticated financial criminal by night, was creating psychological pressures that would soon prove impossible to contain. Derek Fisher, the owner and founder of Wingets, had built his restaurant chain from the ground up through years of hard work, strategic planning, and careful financial management. As the business grew and expanded to multiple locations, Fisher needed someone he could trust completely to handle the complex financial operations that kept his restaurants running smoothly. Emily Long seemed like the perfect choice for this crucial role. She had demonstrated exceptional competence, attention to detail, and the kind of reliability that made Fisher comfortable delegating significant responsibility to her management. As director of operations, Emily had access to virtually every aspect of the company's financial systems. She managed relationships with suppliers, handled vendor payments, oversaw cash flow between locations, and had authorization to move substantial amounts of money as part of her daily responsibilities. Fisher's trust in Emily was so complete that he rarely double-checked her work or questioned her financial decisions. This level of autonomy, combined with Emily's intimate knowledge of the company's systems, created the perfect opportunity for someone with criminal intent to exploit. She was essentially my number two in my company. We worked very closely together. Fisher would later tell investigators, his voice carrying the pain of someone who had been personally betrayed by someone he considered almost family. Beginning in January 2023, Emily had systematically begun stealing from Wingets using a sophisticated scheme that demonstrated both her intelligence and her complete lack of regard for the man who had placed such faith in her abilities. Rather than simply taking cash or forging checks, Emily developed a complex system of financial manipulation that allowed her theft to continue undetected for over 2 years. Her method involved intercepting checks that were meant to pay legitimate business suppliers and vendors, then redirecting those funds into accounts she controlled. This wasn't random or impulsive stealing. It was a carefully planned and methodically executed crime that required detailed knowledge of the company's financial cycles, vendor relationships, and accounting procedures. Emily would time her thefts to coincide with periods when cash flow was high and missing payments might not be immediately noticed. She would also manipulate records to make it appear that vendors had been paid when they actually hadn't, buying herself time before anyone realized money was missing.
The total amount Emily allegedly embezzled over approximately 2.5 years reached a staggering $660,000. A sum that represented not just money, but years of Fisher's hard work, his employees' job security, and the foundation of a business he had built with his own hands. For a small business owner, this wasn't just theft, it was the potential destruction of everything he had worked to create. The discovery came in June 2025, just 2 months after Ryan's cancer diagnosis had begun consuming Emily's public attention and TikTok content. Fisher started noticing that some vendors were complaining about missing payments, and when he began investigating these complaints, he uncovered discrepancies that didn't make sense based on his understanding of the company's financial position. As he dug deeper, the scope of Emily's alleged crimes became clear, revealing a pattern of theft that had been happening right under his nose for years. While Fisher was discovering the extent of Emily's alleged financial crimes, Emily continued sharing her family's cancer journey online, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her secret life was about to be exposed. The practical and emotional challenges of Ryan's illness were mounting rapidly as his condition deteriorated, and Emily was having to navigate increasingly difficult conversations with their young children about death, illness, and an uncertain future.
We were going to get from our 8-year-old, which was, is he going to die? And again, our MO was that we were going to be honest, but we were going to be strategic. So we said, one day, Daddy will die from this cancer. But that is not today. That is not in the near future. Daddy's really healthy right now, and then we're going to do things to keep the cancer from coming back. And that's Mommy and Daddy's job, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep Daddy healthy and to keep the cancer from coming back. But that it will come back, and one day it will kill Daddy. And obviously that's an awful awful to say to your kids. And
The conversation Emily described in her TikTok videos about explaining Ryan's terminal diagnosis to their 8-year-old son, Parker, was genuinely heartbreaking and demonstrated the impossible position that families facing terminal illness find themselves in. How do you explain to a child that their father is dying? How do you balance honesty with hope, truth with age-appropriate information? Emily and Ryan had made the difficult decision to be transparent with their children about the reality of his prognosis, believing that honesty would better prepare them for the inevitable loss they would face. But for Emily, these conversations about Ryan's future may have also represented her growing desperation about her own future. As her alleged crimes were being discovered and criminal charges seemed increasingly likely, Emily may have begun to see these discussions about death and loss as applying to more than just Ryan's situation. When Ryan experienced his first major seizure, a common and frightening symptom of glioblastoma, new restrictions and limitations were imposed on their daily life that added another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. New Hampshire state law prohibited Ryan from driving for a full year following a seizure, which meant that Emily suddenly became responsible for all transportation needs for their family of 5. This included getting the children to and from school, managing all medical appointments, handling grocery shopping and errands, and maintaining her demanding full-time job, all while secretly managing her embezzlement scheme and trying to avoid detection. Emily's TikTok videos from this period show her explaining her fears about leaving Ryan alone with the children, not because she thought he would intentionally harm them, but because his unpredictable seizures made supervision dangerous for everyone involved.
obviously I'm not comfortable leaving him alone with the kids, not because I think he would hurt them, but like it's very scary for them and I don't want them to be in a situation where they don't know what to do. And
The seizure marked a significant turning point in Ryan's condition and in Emily's mental state. She began acknowledging in her videos that his situation would only continue to deteriorate, and the weight of being the sole caregiver for both Ryan and 3 young children was becoming psychologically overwhelming. The woman who had once seemed so competent and in control was clearly struggling to maintain her composure as pressures mounted from every direction.
it's just been really hard for me to acknowledge, like, okay, this isn't going away. This is only going to get worse. Like, you can't keep ignoring everything and just hoping that it disappears, because otherwise I'm going to disintegrate into nothing. And I have 3 kids to look after. I'm still in a really tough place. Like, it's not a secret. And I also would never have admitted that, I think, a long time ago. For those who are going to ask, like, no, I'm not in therapy yet. And I'm trying to keep my kids in the forefront of my mind of, like, I'm their mom and they need me forever. So
During this increasingly difficult period, Emily's TikTok content became more introspective and focused on her own emotional state rather than on practical updates about Ryan's treatment. She began sharing deeply personal reflections about missing simple moments of physical and emotional intimacy with her husband, describing how the illness had changed the fundamental dynamics of their relationship in ways that left her feeling isolated and disconnected.
but the thing that I love about him the most, and when I think of times where we won't be together anymore, like, the thing that breaks my heart the most is, like, at the end of the night, being together, like either laying in bed or like watching a show or just like hanging out in the kitchen.
Simultaneously, Emily began describing her work environment at Wingett's in terms that, in retrospect, take on sinister significance. She characterized her workplace as experiencing absolute chaos and claimed that bizarre and stressful things happened to her there on a daily basis. At the time, her followers interpreted these comments as the normal complaints of someone juggling a demanding job with overwhelming personal responsibilities. However, when viewed alongside the embezzlement allegations,
Emily's description of workplace chaos takes on new meaning. She was experiencing chaos at work, but it was chaos entirely of her own making, as she struggled to maintain her criminal activities while avoiding detection.
I work in the restaurant industry, so like every single second of my day is absolute chaos. It is totally insane, and I see the most unhinged things. And then like in my private life, like everything that happens to me is bizarre.
On August 11th, 2025, Derek Fisher made the decision that would ultimately trigger the final tragedy. After months of investigating the missing funds, documenting discrepancies, and trying to understand how such substantial amounts of money could disappear from his carefully managed business, he contacted the Madbury Police Department to report his suspicions about Emily's embezzlement. Fisher provided investigators with detailed financial records, documentation of missing payments, and evidence that pointed clearly to Emily as the person responsible for the thefts. The police began their investigation immediately, preparing to interview Emily about allegations that, if proven in court, could result in significant prison time. Embezzlement of over $500,000 represents a serious felony that typically carries sentences measured in years, not months. For someone like Emily, who had built her identity around professional success, financial stability, and social respectability, the prospect of criminal charges, public humiliation, and potential imprisonment may have seemed like a complete destruction of everything she had worked to build. Whether Emily knew about Fisher's police report remains unclear, but the timing of subsequent events suggests she may have realized that her alleged crimes were about to be exposed. For someone who had spent years maintaining a carefully crafted image of success and stability, who had presented herself to thousands of TikTok followers as a devoted wife and mother facing adversity with grace and determination, the prospect of being revealed as a criminal may have felt like a fate worse than death itself. Meanwhile, Emily's mental health was clearly deteriorating as the stresses in her life continued mounting from multiple directions. Her TikTok videos from this period show her openly discussing the psychological impact Ryan's illness was having on their children, revealing concerning details about how the family's trauma was affecting even their youngest members.
I think the other part that leads into that is that the kids are also not doing great. They're not like crying all the time and whatever, like as adults might show depression or sadness, but like there's a lot of talk about death. There's a lot, I can see my son, my oldest, worrying. I see him looking at my husband and watching and wondering and saying, you know, to his younger siblings, like, oh, don't do that because daddy doesn't feel good, or just I see the weight that he's carrying, and that has been really hard. My daughter has just been showing signs of grief, and then my youngest.
Emily described how 8-year-old Parker had begun taking on an inappropriate protective role with his younger siblings, constantly monitoring his father's condition and instructing his brother and sister to be gentle with Ryan because daddy doesn't feel good. This child, who should have been focused on typical third-grade concerns like friendships and homework, was instead carrying the emotional burden of trying to shield his family from pain and loss. The boy who would soon become one of Emily's victims was already demonstrating the kind of empathy and protective instinct that made his eventual murder even more incomprehensible. Emily also discussed 6-year-old Ryan Jr.'s grief responses and behavioral changes, explaining how all 3 children had become attached to me like Velcro, requiring constant physical comfort and struggling to sleep alone in their own beds. The children's need for security and stability was intensifying, just as Emily's ability to provide those things was rapidly deteriorating due to her mounting legal troubles and psychological instability.
They're attached to me like Velcro. I couldn't tell you the last time I was alone. They just are so, they need to snuggle all weekend long. It was snuggle, 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 which is great. I love it. But I know the reason behind it, so it's upsetting.
Despite openly discussing her declining mental state, and the obvious signs that she was struggling to cope with the multiple crises in her life, Emily consistently avoided seeking professional psychological help. When TikTok followers repeatedly suggested therapy or counseling, she was evasive and dismissive, always finding reasons why professional help wasn't necessary or accessible.
For those who are going to ask, like, no, I'm not in therapy yet. And I'm trying to keep my kids in the forefront of my mind of like, I'm their mom and they need me forever. So
The irony of Emily repeatedly emphasizing that her children needed her forever, while simultaneously avoiding the mental health treatment that might have helped her provide that stability, would become tragically apparent just days later. Emily's final TikTok video was posted on Saturday, August 16th, 2025, just 2 days before she would commit the murders that would end 4 lives and destroy countless others. In this last message to her followers, she appeared to be making an effort to pull herself together and present a more positive outlook, almost as if she were trying to convince herself as much as her audience that things could still improve.
Makeup on and real clothes for the first time. Basically, makeup since we went to the Cape in July, and real clothes in God only knows how long. So I'm trying to get myself out of this rut. I know that I've said this before, but our kids are definitely struggling. And now I'm starting to notice some changes in our 3-year-old, which is tough because he's too young for therapy. I know that people are going to say play therapy. We've done that before, and I just don't really see the benefit in it. And he's too young for talk therapy, obviously. But like, for example, last night he just couldn't sleep. He was up all night long. He was crying. He's never like that. And I've been starting to notice him stirring more at night and just have a harder time. And it's just devastating. But
in the video, Emily spoke about her 3-year-old son's recent struggles and her determination to make positive changes in their daily routine and family dynamics. She discussed practical plans for improving their situation and expressed what seemed like genuine hope for better days ahead. The video ended on what appeared to be an optimistic note that gave no indication of the violence that would follow just 48 hours later.
today, I am adjusting my perspective, and I'm making a point to get out of my depression and do this for my family. So, that being said, happy Saturday. Everyone's having a fantastic day. I'm going to have a fantastic day.
Less than 48 hours after posting these words about having a fantastic day, there would be no more fantastic days for anyone in the Long family. Emily's final video stands as a haunting reminder of how completely someone can mask their true intentions, even when speaking directly to camera and appearing to share their most honest thoughts and feelings. In the early morning hours of Monday, August 18th, 2025, Emily Long made a decision that would end 4 lives and traumatize countless others. Using a handgun that she had acquired for reasons that remain unclear, she methodically executed a plan that demonstrated both premeditation and a complete break from reality. Emily began by shooting her husband, Ryan, multiple times. The numerous gunshot wounds suggest either intense rage or a cold determination to ensure he couldn't survive to call for help or protect their children. Ryan, who had dedicated his career to helping children with emotional and behavioral problems, who had been fighting brain cancer with courage and dignity, became the first victim of his wife's complete psychological breakdown. After killing Ryan, Emily turned her attention to their children. She shot 8-year-old Carker and 6-year-old Ryan Jr. with single gunshots to the head, swift and decisive actions that suggest she wanted their deaths to be as quick as possible. These were the children she had spoken about protecting and loving forever in her TikTok videos. The children who had been clinging to her like Velcro because they needed security and stability in their frightening world. What makes this tragedy even more psychologically complex is Emily's decision to spare her youngest child. The 3-year-old boy, the same child she had expressed concern about in her final TikTok video, was left alive and physically unharmed in the house with his family's dead bodies. This selective violence demonstrates that even in her severely disturbed mental state, Emily was still making conscious, deliberate choices about who would live and who would die. The psychological reasoning behind Emily's decision to spare one child may never be fully understood, even with extensive analysis of her mental state and motivations.
Some criminal psychologists believe she may have thought his young age would prevent him from forming lasting memories of the trauma, essentially allowing him to grow up without the burden of remembering what happened. Others suggest that maternal instinct may have intervened at the crucial moment, preventing her from completing what she had apparently planned as a murder-suicide that would end all their lives. After killing Ryan, Parker, and Ryan Jr., Emily turned the gun on herself, completing a murder-suicide that destroyed a family that had seemed, from the outside, to be facing their challenges with love and determination. The bodies weren't discovered until that evening, when concerned family members, worried about not hearing from the family, requested that police conduct a welfare check at the Long home.
When Madbury police officers arrived at the Long residence expecting to conduct a routine wellness check, they instead discovered a horrific crime scene that would require multiple agencies to process and investigate. The house that had been featured in Emily's cheerful TikTok videos, where she had shown followers glimpses of their family life and Ryan's medical equipment, had become the site of an unthinkable tragedy that would haunt everyone involved in its aftermath. The surviving 3-year-old had been alone in the house with his dead family members for potentially up to 15 hours, a traumatic experience that child psychologists say could have profound and lasting effects on his development and mental health. The fact that Emily chose to leave him alive while killing everyone else adds another layer of psychological complexity to an already incomprehensible crime. The investigation that followed quickly established Emily as the perpetrator based on physical evidence, witness statements, and the clear pattern of violence. However, understanding the why behind her actions required investigators to piece together the various mounting pressures in Emily's life that had apparently created a perfect storm of desperation, fear, and psychological breakdown. Derek Fisher was devastated when he learned not only about the alleged theft from his business, but also about Emily's violent end and the destruction of a family he had cared about. "I'm still kind of in shock. I don't really believe that, this actually happened," he told reporters. His words reflecting the disbelief of many who had known Emily as a competent, caring person rather than someone capable of such violence.
I was completely devastated and heartbroken. I cared deeply for her and her family. I was around all of her children as they grew up.
In an extraordinary demonstration of compassion and grace that few would have managed under such circumstances, Fisher announced that he wouldn't pursue civil legal action to recover the stolen money from Emily's estate. Instead, he expressed hope that any remaining funds or assets could be directed towards supporting Emily's surviving son, who would now need extensive care, therapy, and financial support for the rest of his childhood and beyond.
Anything that's left should go to that child. He deserves all of it. It's not fair to him. He didn't make this happen. He didn't deserve this.
This gesture of forgiveness, despite enormous financial loss, revealed the genuine affection and respect Fisher had felt for Emily before learning of her alleged crimes. For a small business owner, losing $660,000 represents years of profits, employee wages, and business growth opportunities. Fisher's decision to prioritize the welfare of Emily's surviving child over his own financial recovery demonstrated remarkable humanity in the face of betrayal and tragedy. The $660,000 Emily allegedly stole over 2.5 years represented a sophisticated and sustained criminal enterprise that had gone undetected because of the complete trust Fisher had placed in her management abilities. Forensic accountants worked for months to trace the complex scheme, documenting how Emily had systematically diverted company funds while maintaining her regular professional duties and presenting herself as a reliable, trustworthy employee. What Emily did with all the stolen money remains partially unclear even after extensive financial investigation. Some of the funds were apparently used to maintain the family's middle-class lifestyle, pay for household expenses, and possibly cover medical costs related to Ryan's treatment. However, the sheer amount of money involved suggests that Emily may have been planning for an uncertain future, possibly including legal expenses or the need to disappear if her crimes were discovered. Mental health experts who studied the case noted several factors that may have contributed to Emily's final decision to commit murder-suicide rather than face the consequences of her alleged crimes. The combination of her husband's terminal diagnosis, the enormous stress of being a primary caregiver, the fear of criminal exposure and imprisonment, and the pressure to maintain her carefully crafted public image created what psychologists call a perfect storm of psychological pressures. Financial crimes often trap perpetrators in cycles of escalating desperation, mental health professionals explain. When someone has built their identity around success, respectability, and financial stability, the prospect of losing everything, freedom, reputation, family, and social standing, can feel more threatening than death itself. For someone like Emily, who had spent years presenting herself as competent and in control, the idea of being exposed as a criminal and facing public humiliation may have seemed unbearable. Emily's extensive TikTok presence provided an unprecedented window into the mind of someone approaching such a psychological crisis. Her videos documented not just her husband's illness and their family's struggle, but also her own gradual psychological deterioration as multiple pressures mounted from different directions simultaneously.
The tragedy sent devastating shockwaves through multiple communities that had been touched by the Long family's story. Wingets faced serious financial instability and had to implement completely new oversight procedures and financial controls to prevent similar crimes in the future. The company's reputation suffered as news of the embezzlement spread, and Fisher had to work extensively to rebuild trust with vendors, employees, and customers who questioned how such substantial theft could have gone undetected for so long. The Oyster River School District, where Ryan had worked as a school psychologist, provided extensive grief counseling for staff and students while grappling with the tragic irony that someone so skilled at helping children with mental health issues had been unable to recognize or address the crisis developing within his own family. Ryan's colleagues struggled with guilt and questions about whether they should have noticed warning signs or offered help that might have prevented the tragedy. The Madbury community, a quiet suburban area where violent crime was virtually unknown, struggled to understand how such brutality could occur in their peaceful neighborhood. Support groups formed to help residents process their trauma and fear, while local organizations worked to expand mental health resources and crisis intervention services. Emily's surviving 3-year-old son faced the most uncertain and challenging future of anyone affected by the tragedy. Child Protective Services immediately placed him with extended family members who now had the overwhelming responsibility of helping a traumatized toddler understand why his family was gone, while simultaneously shielding him from the horrific details of how they died. The psychological impact on a child so young of witnessing or being present during such violence is difficult to predict or measure. Child development experts explain that 3-year-olds are old enough to understand that family members are gone, but too young to comprehend concepts like death, murder, or the finality of loss. The surviving child would need years of specialized therapy and support to process his trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms.
A GoFundMe campaign was quickly established to support the child's immediate and long-term needs, including therapy, education, daily care, and the countless expenses involved in raising a child who had suffered such profound trauma. Donations poured in from across the country as people who had followed Emily's TikTok content, learned about the case through news coverage, or simply felt compelled to help, felt the need to do something meaningful for the family's sole survivor. The criminal investigation concluded with authorities officially ruling the deaths of Ryan, Parker, and Ryan Jr. as homicides, while Emily's death was classified as suicide. The embezzlement allegations against Emily were substantiated through extensive financial investigation and forensic accounting, though no prosecution was possible due to her death. The case sparked broader discussions throughout the business community about employee oversight, financial crime detection methods, and the importance of recognizing warning signs of personal crisis before they escalate to violence. Business leaders and mental health professionals began using Emily's story as a case study to educate others about supporting employees who may be under extreme stress while also protecting their organizations from financial crimes. Mental health advocates pointed to the Emily Long case as a stark example of how social media can create artificial connections and false intimacy while simultaneously masking someone's actual need for professional psychological help. Despite having thousands of engaged TikTok followers who offered support, encouragement, and advice, Emily never sought the therapy and professional intervention she desperately needed to address her mounting psychological crisis.
The tragedy also highlighted the particular vulnerabilities that families face when dealing with terminal illness. While Ryan's cancer diagnosis wasn't the direct cause of the violence that followed, serious illness creates additional financial, emotional, and logistical stressors that can contribute to crisis situations, especially when combined with other significant pressures like financial crime or mental health issues. Today, just weeks after the murders, the Emily Long case continues to be analyzed and studied by professionals in law enforcement, mental health services, and business security. The unique combination of financial crime, family violence, social media documentation, and murder-suicide provides ongoing insights into the complex factors that can lead to devastating outcomes when multiple stressors intersect in someone's life. Wingets has worked diligently to rebuild their business with new financial safeguards, oversight procedures, and employee monitoring systems, while also serving as a cautionary tale for other small businesses about the critical importance of financial oversight and the dangers of placing unlimited trust in any single employee, regardless of their apparent reliability or competence. The school district where Ryan worked has enhanced their employee assistance programs and mental health resources, creating new initiatives inspired by Ryan's memory and his dedication to helping children facing emotional challenges. The Madbury community has slowly begun the long process of healing, while simultaneously developing new programs designed to identify and assist families in crisis before situations escalate to violence. Emily's TikTok account was permanently disabled following the murders, but her videos continue to circulate among mental health professionals, law enforcement training programs, and researchers who study them for warning signs that might otherwise go unnoticed in similar cases. The surviving child, now being raised by loving extended family members who have dedicated their lives to his care and recovery, represents both the devastating human cost of Emily's actions and the possibility of resilience and healing even after unimaginable trauma. His future will undoubtedly be shaped by the tragedy he experienced, but it will also be influenced by the determination of those committed to helping him build a meaningful, healthy life despite his traumatic beginning. The Emily Long case serves as a stark reminder of how quickly and completely circumstances can deteriorate when multiple significant stressors intersect in someone's life.
Terminal illness, financial crime, fear of criminal exposure, caregiving stress, and the pressure to maintain a false public image created conditions that led to an outcome nobody could have predicted based on Emily's carefully crafted social media persona. For the thousands of people who followed Emily's TikTok journey and felt emotionally invested in her family's struggle against Ryan's cancer, her story remains a haunting reminder that social media shows us only carefully selected moments and curated glimpses, never the complete reality of someone's life. Behind videos about family love, medical challenges, and fighting against impossible odds was a woman carrying enormous secrets, growing fears of discovery, and mounting psychological pressures that ultimately proved too much to bear. The three victims, Ryan, Parker, and Ryan Jr., deserve to be remembered as individual human beings whose lives were tragically cut short, not merely as statistics in a crime story or cautionary tale about social media deception. Ryan had dedicated his professional life to helping children navigate emotional challenges and had faced his terminal diagnosis with remarkable courage and dignity. 8-year-old Parker and 6-year-old Ryan Jr. were innocent children trying to process their father's illness while maintaining the natural optimism and resilience of childhood, completely unaware that their mother's crisis would ultimately claim their lives. Emily Long appeared to embody everything our society expects and admires in a devoted mother. She was loving, protective, determined to fight for her family's well-being, and willing to share her vulnerabilities publicly to help others facing similar challenges. The revelation that this same woman was capable of murdering her own children forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that love and violence, protection and destruction can exist within the same person when extreme circumstances create the conditions for complete psychological breakdown. This case will likely be studied for years to come, not as entertainment or sensationalized true crime content, but as a serious examination of how various crisis factors can intersect and interact to create tragic outcomes that seem impossible to predict or prevent. For Emily's surviving child, the affected communities, and all who witnessed this tragedy unfold through Emily's own detailed documentation, the ongoing challenge is finding ways to honor the victim's memory while working to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The Long family story ultimately reminds us that behind every true crime case are real people whose futures were stolen, dreams that were destroyed, and communities that were forever changed by violence that could never be undone. In a world where social media encourages us to present curated, idealized versions of our lives, this case forces us to remember that we never truly know what challenges, pressures, or crises others may be facing behind their carefully constructed digital facades. Most importantly, the Emily Long case underscores the critical importance of recognizing warning signs of psychological crisis, encouraging professional mental health treatment when needed, and creating support systems that address real needs rather than relying on the artificial connections and superficial support that social media platforms provide. If this case has taught us anything valuable about ourselves and our digital age, let it be this: real human connection, professional help when needed, and honest acknowledgement of our struggles are far more important than maintaining perfect online images or finding validation through social media engagement. Make sure to subscribe to Grim Reality for more in-depth coverage of cases that reveal the complex psychological and social factors behind true crime stories. We're committed to examining these tragedies with the respect they deserve while uncovering insights that might help prevent similar cases in the future.